Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're attending from. Today, we're bringing you yet another iteration of our forward-facing VCF webinars. Joining us today, we've got Steve Fusco from Business Development and Financial Services at VMware Cloud Foundation, and Paul Nothard, Principal Solutions Architect of Financial Services with VMware Cloud Foundation. Today, we're going to be talking about the state of the financial services industry and a lot of the impacts with upcoming technology on so many levels. Talking about the importance of cybersecurity, the cost of run versus change the business, regulatory compliance, big topic today. Going to spend some time on that, talking about data sovereignty and privacy, customer retention and expectations. Really sort of a volatile world when it comes to customer faith, particularly at that security level. Automation and IT transformation, sort of our bread and butter around here, and what that larger cloudification of the business looks like. Talking about legacy technology and emerging technologies, where have we been, where are we going, and changes to the industry and responses. So just as a reminder before we get into that, um, so next week, we have another session coming up. Cyber recovery for VMware Cloud Foundation coming up on April 17th with Yumi Hong, Balu Diarbais, and Banu Vilma. And automated self-service industry and management of infrastructure and application services with VMware Cloud Foundation coming up on the 24th with Mark Leake. And then coming up on May 1st, hard to believe that May is just around the corner already, cost savings and business benefits enabled by VMware Cloud Foundation, and that'll be hosted by Pete Fletcher. So with that, that's sort of enough from me. Gentlemen, why don't you take it away? Tell us a little bit about yourselves, and we can get rolling.
Paul?
Thanks for having us, guys. Quick background about myself. I'm a long-term VMware person, but prior to VMware, I worked within the financial services sector itself for a number of years, back in my early days. So that's where I kind of cut my teeth and understood the financial services. After that, I've worked for a couple of small companies like Intel, and then I've been a long time at VMware. And I've done everything from kind of post-sales all the way through to pre-sales. And these days, what I'm doing is I'm working within the global financial services team, just talking to our customers, trying to advise them about various things that are going on within the financial services industry, and more importantly, how we, VMware, can help. Steve.
Yeah, so Steve Fusco, and I just want to give you a little bit of background. Our backgrounds are a bit different, and so I've got about 28 years experience in financial services, and so running large data centers, that sort of thing, an infrastructure background, also a bit of a CIO background for about 6 or 7 years. So I tend to come at everything from the customer perspective and tend to look at the industry holistically. And as we get started in this, I think back that in my years, in my 28 years, I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like what we're looking at right now in terms of change and what's going on in the industry. It's a very exciting time, and I think technology is going to be the differentiator for most of these firms going forward. And so when we think about what's top of mind, I know that we went through a brief agenda there, but compliance and security is certainly at the top of the list. And when I think about compliance and I look at the numbers in the industry and how much money is being spent, and I guess on average it's about $10,000 per employee that firms are spending, and it turns out about to be 8% of budget on compliance, and how important that is to the industry, because both compliance and security, customers tend to vote with their feet if there's a breach, and they'll go elsewhere. So you need to do it right, and you need to do it right 100% of the time. And Paul, just wanted to get your take on compliance.
So, well, starting at the beginning, because compliance will come in, but part of compliance is cybersecurity, which is, first on the agenda, so we've got to tackle that. It is absolutely crucial. Cybersecurity, it goes without saying that, you want to be secure within your industry. However, it's a little bit more pertinent to us for the simple reason that we bank with the banks. It's our data. It's our data that they need to be secure with. Now, where compliance comes into that, and why security is part of the compliance, is because We are entrusting our very, very personal data, our spending data, our trading data, our insurance data. And when you talk to insurance companies, you have to tell them your inside leg measurement and everything. That's very important to be secure. So one of the first topics we're going to talk about today is just around, why is cybersecurity so important? There's a huge statistic. I won't go into the details because I'll probably misquote it, but the whole idea about ransomware. Ransomware is a huge problem today, and banks are no more immune than anybody else. Now, ransomware is important because two reasons. One, they obviously want to hold your data to ransom, but two, if you don't pay or there are any problems, they will give your data up, and then the financial institution, whatever it might be, will be hit with not only heavy fines but reputational damage, and it can and possibly will destroy their business. So this isn't just you should do this. This is a must do sort of thing. So from a security perspective, it's not just the usual encryption in flight, at rest, all of that good stuff that's been going for a while. It's a bit deeper than that. How do you find it with the customers you speak to, Steve?
Well, I think security and compliance, I mean, obviously compliance is a must-have, security is as well. But the number of attacks is astonishing on these companies every single day. And so they have to pay particular attention to that and have to put a lot of resources towards defending themselves. Because, after all, let's be, frank, on the internet, it looks like a big bag of money, right? And so if they can get their piece of that or hold you for ransom, and plenty have done it. And if you're talking about trillions of dollars at stake here, as Paul said, as you said, Paul, reputational risk. And at the end of the day, that's what most of these companies have, is their reputation. If they lose that because of a breach of any kind, or they're not compliant, like I said earlier, they'll move to another firm, and they'll do it pretty quickly, because it's much easier today than it's ever been to sign up with a new firm. So I think
Especially
that,
with the rise of the various fintechs coming in and challenging the market leaders in every industry within financial services. It's
yeah,
challenging. So on the question about taking the security thing further, what happens if there is if there is ransomware? Would you say that we can help? I'm biased, of course, but
oh, absolutely, we can help. I mean, and we have lots of examples where VMware has helped pretty significantly. And I don't even think that people are very much aware of the product set and how it works. And but I think more banks are becoming aware of it, and they absolutely need it and need to learn more about it. And Paul, maybe you can explain specifically about the product.
so I'm not going to go into too many technical details today because we're keeping it quite high level. But the bottom line is we will help prevent ransomware in the sense that we will give you good places to go if and as and when you're attacked. However, before the anti-ransomware solutions that we have, we also help secure your environment, whether that be through microsegmentation, whether it be through just good old-fashioned security at the bottom level, the encryption at rest, etc. All of those things. We run a very tight ship. We run a very enterprise-ready platform that meets the vast majority of standards out there. For example, we meet PCI DSS standards, etc., etc. So we have the tool set with which companies can essentially secure their data and make it bulletproof, so that they comply with not only the regulations that are forcing them to do things, but they want to do the right thing by their own business. Because if you lose your money, if you lose your customer data, it's not particularly good for business. So if we switch gears, second topic we're talking about today is the difference between the cost difference between running the bank and changing the bank. I appreciate banks in the title, but this term applies equally across retail, investment, insurance, all of the financial services industry. It's a common term. Do you want to talk about the conversations we've been having about with customers about run the bank versus change the bank, and how we slip in there?
Yeah, I'd say this is probably in the top three list of things that we end up discussing with our larger customers in particular. And in order to compete with what's coming, I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of change, a lot of fintechs, a lot of different players getting into the industry. And in order to compete in the future, you need to take some of your budget, which is not growing, by the way, by and large. So you have to take existing budget and find ways to change the bank and to build that better experience with your customers, become more secure, become more compliant, update those legacy systems. And so those are challenges that all the banks are having today. And so, in order to gain that budget somewhere, you need to standardize. You need to have a platform like VCF will allow you to take your entire world, protect those four walls, simplify it. Your data is not all over the place. You'll be able to take the information and keep it close to the vest, make sure it's compliant, secure, and so forth. Automate, right, and be able to take dollars out of the business, out of run the business and apply it to change the business. So typically we find that 70 to maybe 90% of IT budgets are allocated to run the business. And so they only have 10 to 15% to change things and now compete with the Robinhoods of the world and those sorts of companies and the fintechs. So that's one area where VCF can help. And we've seen numbers between 30 and 40% savings. And we can talk specifically about how we can do that, but it's an important way for these banks to be able to compete. Without that, you're going to be drowning in that technical debt, those legacy applications, that constant security and compliance issue that you need to deal with. Interested in your opinion, Paul.
So it's kind of like putting words into your mouth. It's kind of like that you need to do more with less because you've got more pressures upon you, whether it be regulatory from the outside world, whether it be customers demanding more or else they'll move elsewhere, or whether it be developers internally wanting a quicker path to production, because they want the cloud-like experience of, click next and as if by magic it all happens. And I think what you're saying, to put words into your mouth, is we're bringing that cloud-like consumption model on premises as well as off premises. It doesn't matter which. So it's very much a target operating model that we're switching to allow the IT function of the bank to provide a platform from which they can consume at pace while standardizing, while being secure, while saving money. And all of a sudden that then opens up various avenues to allow them to innovate and better change the bank. So to tackle the various things that they have to do to innovate, to progress the business. It's about the business drivers as opposed to the other.
100%. And it's really about retaining those your customers because they have so many options these days. So in order to compete, you now have to have something different. You have to have that differentiator, something that's easy. And if you look at the way that banking's going and the younger generation in particular, just a quick story. I worked for Fidelity Investments for a little over 20 years, and my son decided to open a brokerage account. Did he go to Fidelity? No, he went to Robinhood. It was easy. They had $0 trades. He says, Dad, that's for older people like you, and my generation wants to be able to do things a little bit differently. And so he was using Robinhood as an example. And I said, well, there's risk with some of these new fintechs, but ultimately I got the point. And I think the banks are getting the point that they need to be able to compete with the Robinhoods. In fact, Robinhood changed the industry when they went to $0 trades. That forced Schwab and Fidelity and others to do the same. And that's a really powerful thing that I don't think we've ever seen in the industry. So they really disrupted that in a significant way. So the banks really paid attention to that and said, well, we need to be at least as good, if not better, than Robinhood. And I know that, just in talking to people in the industry, that's very much a focus. How can we provide services that are easier to use? And also the other point is that the banks tend to be very siloed. So
Yeah.
you've got to go and maybe use two or three different applications in order to accomplish something you're trying to do. Whereas they want to see everything compressed into that one application. They want to have that better experience, that customized experience. And so, that's something that I hear a lot of passion about. And but you have to have the budget in order to make those things happen, and you've got to get ahead of it. And interested, Paul, if you've seen any new trends in that area in terms of customer expectations.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the customers in the world we work in, they're very demanding, and if you don't keep up, they will, as you say, they will go elsewhere. So a lot of our established customers, our newer customers, etc., what they are stuck with sometimes is a chunk of tech debt, and they need to manage and corral and secure and innovate all at the same time. So it's kind of like, it's the old analogy of trying to change the wheels of the car while it's driving along. In this case, we're changing the engine as well and trying to make it faster. And it's hard, make no bones about it. Now, for a while, there was a big cloud button that people thought would fix everything. But I think the pragmatic reality is cloud is good for some things, and I'm not knocking it. It is really fantastic for some things, but it's not the panacea. It's not where everybody is going. So what we need to do is we need to find a pragmatic middle ground between the kind of the two ways of doing things. I mean, if you think about it, how many of our customers have mainframes? Everyone, really, pretty much.
Yeah.
They still exist, and they still exist for a reason. So there is going to be a bit of a tail for tech like that. We want to allow customers to move forward, to innovate, get that path to production for the developers who are fighting to beat the business needs and make the company more profitable and just survive in some cases. But at the same time, we need to secure it. We need to take care of the existing tech debt. And I think that's what I find is that customers realize that we do both. We allow that platform to exist, to be, let's be honest, really efficient, and to run all the things, whether it be the new Kubernetes stuff or whether it be the older virtual machine type stuff or a bit in the middle, RDBMSs, all of this good stuff. We need to be able to be all things for all people, but be efficient and automate and create a consumption model that is in keeping with the wants and needs of our developers, etc.
I think that's also ties into the private cloud.
Yeah,
Because to
definitely.
your point, a lot of the developers they say, "Hey, hurry up, take some developers and go build X," and they're firing up new instances on AWS. All of a sudden, they're getting these massive bills, and they're
Or
sort
big fines.
of right.
Because let's
Yeah,
be honest, if you're a Canadian bank and you accidentally press the deploy button in the wrong place, oops, I'm not compliant with my Canadian data rules. And then you move to Europe, and then it gets a lot more complicated. As you know, the regulations in Europe are very strong. The data privacy rules in Europe, especially, you get the stereotypes of Switzerland, etc. But that's across the world. That's in Asia Pac and everybody. Everybody needs to understand where their data is at any given time, or else you're in breach of very stringent rules.
Yeah, there's also the people aspect of this too, is you have these legacy
Yeah,
applications, people that have been running these things for 10, 15, 20 years are now retiring. Are there people in place? Unless you modernize, you may not have the people in place in order to keep these systems running.
yeah,
And then on the other end of things, that building those new applications and AI and so forth, that you have the people that can fill those roles. And I know that
yeah,
businesses are challenged by that. It's easy to put together a strategy, but you need the forces, you need the infrastructure, you need the baseline to build that next generation the way that VCF can.
yeah,
But you need the people in order to get that done. So I know that that's something that comes up a lot in conversation
yeah.
with challenges in every respect, right?
No, absolutely. And I'm going to pick up on the two letters that you said there, AI. We can't have a webinar without talking about AI. I think AI is fantastic. My background is in AI. I did a degree in AI back in 1990 something or other, but we'll gloss over that. Um, but everybody is doing AI to a greater or lesser extent. That we cannot escape. Where it gets very interesting is where AI meets regulations. Now, I'm not talking about regulations that are either coming now or in the very near future that might talk about, the use of AI. And there's a whole philosophical debate about that, and I won't get into that here. But there are existing rules that you need to comply with. So if I take examples, there's a GDPR rule. It's been about for ages. The GDPR rule gives a right to forget. How do you forget a model that might have been trained upon your data? I'm not giving you an answer for this now. What I am doing is I'm suggesting that you need to have control of your models. You need to have a control, an understanding of what data is going where, because you do not want to be fined by, pick your favorite regulatory authority, and be told that, sorry, you've put the data in the wrong geography and that's not allowed and we're going to fine you a lot of money. And we're not talking trivial fines here. A big company a big cloud company was fined for data privacy laws in the region of 700 million at one point. That's a non-trivial amount of money, and that's purely because of data privacy. So you have to be careful about that. And on the AI, very shameless plug here, VMware has released private AI. And the reason we've done that is to essentially control your data and have a good understanding of what is running where, to do the most with it you possibly can, and frankly, to be the most efficient. One of the words that I use a lot is efficiency. So efficiency is one of the key things that changes the run the bank conversation, because we can and are the most efficient if you use the tooling properly. But it also works with AI. So when you're doing AI is an incredibly force for good, but also a force for bad, in the sense that it is computationally exceptionally intensive. Now, that leads on to two other things, and placate me here by going down this route a little bit. The first route is around cost, simple as that. Running these AI workloads is incredibly expensive to do, so you need to be most efficient about this fundamentally expensive hardware that you're paying for, and make the best use of it. But tying into the regulatory side in an odd way that people don't usually pick up on is that whole idea of ESG. Now, I know ESG has its ups and downs in terms of popularity, but the sustainability part of ESG is not an option in some countries. If you want to do business in Europe, you have to do it. You have to be exceptionally efficient. Now, a very interesting thing that people often forget is, for every ton of carbon saved, that's money that you're saving, because it costs electricity to do that. So what we need to do is we need to provide a platform that can be very efficient, very agile, and very secure. And I believe fundamentally that that's what we do. And that's a huge topic of conversation with the vast majority of financial services companies. I went down a little bit of a route there, but maybe we can talk about how we deal with the legacy technologies and the emerging technologies from here.
Well, I think the legacy technologies. I think that again, that's about the people. It's about modernizing those applications, those platforms, and again, we provide the foundation to do that in most cases. I think, and I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent myself, Paul, is about AI. Is that we all have to understand why this is so important. It's not just important because it's cool; it's where the industry is going. And in order to retain those users and customers, you need to be able to provide that AI experience, that customized experience. And so if you look at what the banks are really understanding this. I think the Bank of America has about 650 patents just on AI that they've acquired in the last year, just in 2023. And JP Morgan Chase, I think, has a record 200 AI researchers that they've hired within the firm in the last year. So if you don't think it's important, or you think there's time to wait, that's not the case. The horse is out of the barn, as they say. So in order to provide, so I want to give you just one example of what I hear is combining a little bit on the insurance side as well, is that if you're looking for a home, which I know is hard these days, there seems to be 5 buyers for every home that's out there. They're very expensive, and interest rates are very high, and so it's a very competitive market. So if I were to show up somewhere The new expectation is I'm going to go to an open house. I'm going to on my bank is going to know that I'm at the open house. Make some recommendations. Are you going to apply for a mortgage? If so, here's the price that we can give you based on the house. We know where you are, so Internet of Things sort of thing, being worked into the program. And so it knows where you are, it knows the house that you're at, it knows the value of that house, it knows your credit score, and can give you and say before you leave, you can offer X number of dollars for that home today. And then there'll be an insurance component of that as well. And say, hey, we know that you're at a house, you're applying for a home. This will be the insurance payment on that house, so you can be assured that you're a qualified buyer when you go into that home. And so this is one way where financial services, insurance, everything's getting tied together at that end user. And to Paul's point, we need to be able to have the systems, compliance and security, and to make all of that work seamlessly and not end up on the cover of the Wall Street Journal because you had a breach. And that's where the complexity comes in. But I wanted to sort of paint that picture, is that and remembering the customers at the end of all of this, and we need to think about that as we're building these things and prioritizing these things. We're trying to save money, we're trying to optimize, we're trying to get more efficient, but towards that end, about creating that sticky customer experience so that they stay with you for years, not months, not days. And Paul, just again, what are you seeing in terms of the AI landscape and in banking?
It's fascinating, to be honest. There's a lot of change. Obviously, larger language models are, the order of the day. Everybody's doing some of that. There is some debate about how useful that will be and whether you go for large language versus small language. Anyway, that's another story. A couple of examples just to touch on. The first is a fascinating example that, without naming names, there are various companies that do anti-money laundering and sanction busting checks. It's part of the law. Everybody does it, as our listeners will know. And when you're doing things like that, you're looking for trends. So what happens is there are quite a few established systems that have been going for years, and they are classified as AI. However, they're not large language models. And so just to be clear, AI has been going on for a very, very long time. It's the possibilities have increased dramatically because of the compute that's available to people. But these checks, these classifiers, have been going for quite some time. But the issue they found is they would flag a trade, and this trade is flagged as being suspicious. It would then take the team between 2 and 4 hours to work out why that trade was being flagged as suspicious. It was a bit of a closed box mentality. When you looked at the algorithms, it would look at it and say, and flag it to say statistically that is probably a problem. What an innovative way of using large language models is they will consume that data, and then you just ask it in plain English, and you basically say, why has this trade been flagged as blah? And it will say it's because Bob over here is buying a lot of coffee, but he never buys coffee usually. So we think, and it will go into all that detail. So it's a fascinating merging of the two types of AI, well, two of the many types of AI, the more traditional classification versus the generative AI through large language models and the like. So it's really interesting. So that's the first aspect. The second aspect is around AI, but also the use of AI in very important functions and how it goes into the regulatory side of the house. I'm European, I'm based in the UK, so I'm a bit biased here, but what I'm hearing in the industry a lot is everybody is talking about DORA. And I'm not talking about the Explorer here, I'm talking about the new regulations that are enacted and they're being implemented this year. You have to get your house in order by January next year, if I get that right, January 25. Everybody has to have an answer to it. Now, the DORA rules, let me talk very broadly here. The two things that I pull out of them that are very interesting for suppliers is that, first of all, everybody has a requirement to have an operational resilience view. Now, that's not just it needs to be up all the time. It's about doing the right thing at the right time for the right software. So if your excuse me, your door lock software goes, And it's not too much of an issue. However, if you're a market maker, you really, really need to have your systems up and running. And what we bring to the table, quite selfishly and honestly, we provide a really, really good business continuity solution. I won't go into the details here, but additionally, we provide that disaster recovery resilience solution as well, so that you can move from one site to the other when things go wrong. That's pretty much out of the box with our stuff. With VCF, you can do this relatively easily, and you can just put various things into a protected machine. And anyway, that's details. The other aspect, though, about DORA, which is fascinating, is around concentration risk. Now, our listeners will know about concentration risk if they're in the financial services, because it would typically be about 5 funds are all concentrated on one Azerbaijani future, or something random like that. That's concentration risk from a financial perspective.
Mm-hmm.
But from an IT perspective, it's essentially putting all your eggs in one basket. It's trying to avoid that. Now, there was a very specific government paper in the UK from the Treasury a couple of years back that called out the fact that if an individual cloud service provider went down, the UK would lose, in the order of, from memory, it was around about 60% of retail banking. That's a bit of an issue. So that is the concentration risk on one supplier. So what the DORA Act seeks to do is provide that resilience through having an exit strategy, moving from one provider to another. It's not about exiting from region A to region B. It's potentially about exiting from provider A to provider B. So, and then when you tie that into the AI strategy that has been going on with a lot of banks, where they've gone very big with the buy button on one particular company, you have to be very careful to not put all your eggs in one basket, not just from it's a good business practice perspective, but from a regulatory perspective. You will be told that you have to change it. If you're putting critical things, such as, let's say, an underwriting function that you talked about, using real-time AIML to do some stuff to when you're going to your realtor and saying, can I buy this house? And yes, here's your mortgage. If you're putting things like that that's critical to your business, and you're putting it in a position where there is no exit strategy, that's problematic. So it is AI related, but it's also very, very heavily around the compliance and the DORA, essentially. That would be my takeaway is, even if you're not European, if you do business in Europe at all, you need to understand the implication of the DORA Act. Simple as that.
Right. And there's no shortage of change in the industry. DORA is one of the latest examples. Compliance is always there. Compliance is always changing. AI is coming into the picture, but also another consideration is what's happening to the industry as a whole, right, Paul? I mean, it's fundamentally changing the way that it looks, and even some of the customers that I talk to are concerned about some of the large players in tech, right, and working with them because they see them as eventually maybe becoming
Competitors.
banks, right? And so they feel like they're giving some of their infrastructure to a potential somebody they're going to be competing against in the future. So it's definitely a worry. So just curious. I mean, I've got I have my opinions about this. I'm curious about
Yes.
yours and this. Looking at it from 30,000 feet and the changes that we're starting to see.
I think, there's an old phrase my boss used back in, the 90s, is the only constant is change. That's a shout out to John if he listens. The only constant is change. You have to plan for change. But the key thing with banking is it's about the risk of change. Not completely eliminating risk. You can't do that. It's about mitigating risk as best you possibly can under the circumstance. The whole multiplication between your outcome versus implication. So companies, banks, and financial institutions need to change quickly, but you don't necessarily want to change at all costs. So if I take an example that's very public, is in the UK, we've got a bank called the TSB, Trustee Savings Bank. I think the technical term is they screwed up massively, to the extent that they lost in the order of, I think it was £140 million in business, and additionally they were fined 40 million, and a number of executives had to go. That's because they changed too quickly. So it's about yes, absolutely tackle your changing market and tackle your customers and try and compete with the fintechs, but think about the risks involved, and don't just do things for giggles. There has to be a business reason to do something. So I guess that how are things changing? The speed is the biggest thing. You turn the corner, there's a new thing going on now, and by thing I don't necessarily mean technology. I mean new products coming out. So the impetus is to change quickly, but we also have to look to the future. So if I go back to the very first topic, which is cybersecurity, we're encrypting things today that, and if we put them in a backup or wherever, because we legally have to, what happens with quantum computing? Let's say, I don't know, 5 years' time, let's say we make a breakthrough in quantum, which means we can suddenly crack all of these algorithms that used to encrypt all of our stuff now. That's a bit of an issue. You need to start planning now for regulations and technology that's going to be in place in 5 years. And that's not an easy thing to do. So, putting it all the way back, you need a flexible, resilient platform that can swap in encryption modules, change them at will, to be flexible, to give the software defined side of things, so that the developers can be very flexible and just do to shorten their path to production while keeping them compliant and stopping the executives getting fined or put in jail. There's a lot of change going on.
Yeah, and from my perspective, and again, from the business's perspective, I think what you're seeing is that the banks were traditionally competing with each other.
Yeah.
Then the fintechs came in and they were partnering with the fintechs, but then some of the fintechs started to compete with them. Then the retailers are getting involved and offering pay plans and pay cards in partnership with banks. And then you're seeing the big tech companies getting into the picture, right? You've got Google and Amazon, and you've got Google Pay and Apple Pay, and you've got all these different tools available. And I was reading something. I've got a note here. It says 70% of people 18 to 34 expect to get their financial products from big tech in the next 5 years.
Yeah.
That's a significant thing. The other thing I'd bring up is the concept of a super app. And I remember, earlier in our conversation, Paul, we're talking about aggregating, the silos from the bank into one application. Well, now they're aggregating, your communications, your chatting, et cetera, with financial services, with tools like WeChat, which I think has about 1.3 billion people using that application today. So the financial services climate couldn't be any more different than when I got started, 28 years ago. This is an entirely new world, and it's driven by technology. And technology is going to give your company that differentiator by controlling, making sure that you're compliant, making sure you can go at the speed of light when you need to. That you're not firing up instances at a lot of big tech companies, that you've got control over the data, you've got control over your instances, your development platforms, you're cutting your costs so that you can take those dollars, like back to the change the bank example, and take those dollars because you desperately need to make sure you're applying money towards change the bank. Otherwise, you're going to be an also ran. And that may apply to some of the larger banks. Wouldn't you agree, Paul?
Oh, absolutely. Wouldn't it be good if we had a platform that would help people out with that? Let's be honest, that's why we're here. That's why we work for VMware by Broadcom, because we fundamentally believe we do have a platform that will address a lot of those concerns. We can't solve everything, but we're good. We're not perfect, but we can solve a large number of the concerns that a lot of our financial services customers come to us with.
Yeah, and when I look at our competitors, quite honestly, and again, I used to buy from just about everybody. I think we have the best platform on the planet, and the best platform to build the sorts of things that we've been talking about today. I don't think it's even close in terms of what we provide when it comes to ransomware, compliance, security, private AI, as Paul mentioned, and the importance of AI. But having that platform, having as many years as we've been doing this behind us, knowing that just about every single the largest banks in the world, we have a VMware foundation to build on, and have been very successful at that. So Again, Paul, I'm trying. I went through our agenda in my head, and I'm thinking we've covered about everything. Have we missed anything?
We've missed lots, but we can't fit it all in today. Maybe it's worth seeing if there are any questions out there just now.
All right, let's do that.
Anders, are you there?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, gentlemen. I got to say, it's just been fantastic watching you guys go back and forth. And I'm sitting here thinking, well, I'm crossing my fingers going, please come present at Explore coming up in August, because I could have watched another hour of this. And that begs the question, can we get you back? This has been super duper
Yeah.
engaging, and we absolutely love to hear more. I know we're coming up at the top of the hour. We did get in one question, and
Okay.
I think you pretty well covered it, but there may be something you want to double click on at this point, which is how you see AI affecting the financial services industry, both today and in the future. And I know you did elaborate on that a little bit, but any
Yeah.
final thoughts on that just while we're here? We got a couple more
Well, I've
minutes left.
definitely got one thought on it,
All right.
and maybe Steve has as well. So if I tackle it first, and this is interesting because this is about our collaboration with others. Funnily enough, you talked about Explore. Last year at Explore, I did a presentation and we talked about MLOps, because there are many companies do it. So I'm not preferring any one over anybody else. I have to be agnostic here. There's a company called Domino Data Lab, and the reason I mention them is because they bring a degree of control to the AI pipelines. Now, whether you use Domino or someone else, I'm not stating my preference here, but companies need to understand that system of record when you're training models, when you're implementing models, putting the path to production. For example, GDPR gives you the right to be forgotten. How do you deal with that? If someone says, I didn't get my underwriting answer that I wanted for my mortgage that Steve was talking about right on time. Why didn't I get that? They need to be able to prove. There's a really interesting question about, and I'm not going to go too deep into this because it's controversial, but there is a question about, should you, if I'm getting car insurance, if I am looking at car insurance and I decide that for example, I buy a pink car and it's cheaper to insure than a red car, is that using a second level protected characteristic? Is that because men buy red cars and women buy pink cars? I'm not commenting either way there, just to be clear. This is a written up statement, so I'm on safe ground here. But there are ethical questions around that. Was that model trained on particular data? I need to be able to have a system of record to go back and find that. Now, obviously, the MLOps platform is part of that, a significant part of that. And talk to my colleagues, go look at the presentation I did last year with Yuval from Domino. That will address that. But you need a platform on which to do this. And fundamentally, we provide that secure but agile platform that allows a system of record like that to work. It's very much for the developers amongst you, it's very much like a CI/CD pipeline, but for AI models. So you know your path to production for the AI model is safe, secure, reliable, and you can retrospectively go and introspect it to work out where decisions were made in the past. I would, a bit of a side thing, but one of my predictions for this year is this is a year of litigation over badly implemented AI. That could be fascinating to watch. Steve, do you have any comments about where you're seeing some of the other AI stuff? I know you talked about, I'll let you talk about it.
Well, I mean, there's so many use cases in financial services, it's really hard to prioritize, right? And then, so from a security perspective, you've got fraud detection and you've got things like that. I think also in life insurance, enhanced claims processing, things that I'm always going to look at the things that are going to help that end customer, right? And at the end of the day, I think AI is going to, when I gave the mortgage example, there's so many different aspects to that. And you're dealing with different companies, partners, et cetera. But what you're doing is providing the best possible experience for that end user. And to me, that's what it's about, because this generation that's coming up wants a highly customized experience. They want you to know how old they are, what their preferences are, where they like to eat, those sorts of things. Say, hey, you're spending a little too much money on going out to eat lately. You may want to cut that back. or at this rate you'll have $4,000 left over to go on a vacation if you like, those kinds of things. Or your portfolio is not working to your advantage as much as it could. We recommend making these three changes to these ETFs or whatever. And I think people will appreciate that, especially if they see the results. But again, as Paul, always points out, is that it's about building that secure foundation to build these things on top of, and that's I think where we come in is building that secure foundation. But I think when I looked at what the financial sector is spending on AI and the big players, as I mentioned before, getting all these patents. I think B of A has a record number of patents right now. JPMC has a record number of AI researchers working for them. And Wells Fargo's got nearly 200 AI projects fired up. It tells you a lot about what's going on in the industry right now, and that's where the action is. They need the compute power, but they need the platform to put everything on top of. And I think the world's going to change fundamentally in a significant way over the next 5 years, and mostly due to AI.
Just as a last interesting aside, and I won't name the company that does it, but you can now, from an insurance perspective, you can underwrite your AI model. So you're underwriting it to say it could be wrong. We're pretty sure it's right, but the insurance company will underwrite it and take that risk.
Sort of
That's fascinating. So you get a kind of a very iterative model.
It's like a digital version of an errors and omissions insurance on your board of directors, right? It's like you can only go so far. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Awesome.
It's fun times.
For sure, for sure. And of course, there's always going to be the big questions about what happens when you start putting in, predictive analytics into this from an, ethical standpoint. Is it okay for a bank to tell their customer using that prediction, hey, the Fed's going to lower the interest rate, might be a good time to refinance your home versus, let's take a look at GameStop stock, right? There's that whole, where do we draw the line where it's helping your financial future versus cheating for you, right? There's a lot there. Very interesting.
Yes.
Yeah, in fact, regulatory is way behind on all of this. I think that the technology is far ahead. So to your point, Anders, is they're gonna have to catch up to AI in terms of stopping it from doing things that may not be the smartest thing to do.
One thing that's just come to mind actually is I went last November. I presented out at a financial services conference in London, and one of the things that cropped up from one of the other speakers was a very simple statistic that, and I forget the exact number, so forgive me here, but it was in the order of 9% of financial fraud in the world is actually, believe it or not, romance fraud. It was something along those lines. Now that's bad in itself. Now there's a whole load of stuff about data privacies and how the interlopers con the people they need to get this personal data. That's another story around security. But the interesting one is down the line with certain compliance acts and certain regulatory acts that are coming into play, is that not only will banks be liable for certain amounts of this money, but individuals within the banks could be responsible for a certain amount of that money. And it's not done yet, but there are certain acts that are in Europe, I speak to mainly, but there is a country possibility to say that certain rules could be regarded as criminal charges for said banks. So this has not happened, but in a future world, it could be that because you didn't pay attention to the spending of your client X, and the client X decided to suddenly invest lots of money in a romantic friend, shall we say, that was a con man or woman, you as a bank could be held liable for not doing that. I'm not saying that's the case yet, but this is the sort of future we're looking at. And it is a bit of an arms race between the fraudsters and the banks, because the banks are using AI to pick up the fraudsters, but the fraudsters are using AI to defraud the customers. So it's a bit of an arms race. And what that means is, from our perspective, a very selfish platform perspective, we need to make the banks very agile to go quickly within the regulatory frameworks to keep it on top of this before it dramatically affects their business. It's very interesting times.
Yeah,
We could
the
do a
dark
whole topic
side of
on
AI
AI.
is could be
Mm.
an interesting future topic because, to Paul's
Yeah,
point, deep fakes and all that's happening today. I heard about a fake board meeting where only the CEO was the real person at the meeting. So there's the dark side of AI is going to be an interesting topic, and how do you mitigate the risk against that? So it's going to
Mhm.
be interesting.
For sure. Yeah, I just shared an article this morning talking about the FBI looking into creating a tiger team for looking at AI for security purposes. And immediately, sort of the thing top of mind is as soon as we come up with a solution, the bad actors are going to come up with some way to breach it. And how do we maintain that cycle? And so particularly for high compliance industries, that's going to
yeah,
be sort of a constant, carrot and stick routine, right? Carrot and stick, horse and cart,
absolutely.
one of those old timey metaphors, but
Yeah.
awesome. Well, gentlemen,
Carrot and stick.
we're sort of there. Do we have any parting shots before we hit the road today?
My parting shot would be let us help you. We have a lot to offer. We solve a lot of the problems with our tech, and we have the experience of doing it with others. So come talk to your local rep, reach out to us. We'd be more than happy to talk to you, or might see you explore next year or this year, sorry.
This year? Yeah, coming up.
Yeah, I'd say the same. I mean, I do a lot of executive briefings, and people are surprised at the functionality that we do have. So if you're surprised by anything that you heard today, please reach out. We have some of the smartest people in the industry, and like I said earlier, we are embedded in the top banks in the world, so we have a lot of experience. Please take advantage of it.
Awesome. All righty, gentlemen. Well, thank you so much again for coming in. Hopefully we can get you back. Look forward to hopefully seeing you at Explore, and we appreciate your time today.
Cool. Thank you. Thanks for
Thank
having
you,
us.
Andrew.
Right. Take care.